So let me start the live server. Going to align to the right and this one to the left. Can edit the code here and see the result there. Just okay. So last time we just covered script. So how to select attributes and classes. We will take a look again. So this time we had these elements with classes as previously. New highlight. We have just changed the class in the console. Let's just check. Finish. Okay. Now, if I want to select an element by a class, I can actually do it with document dot query selector with the class name. So for selecting class name, we should use dot notation, highlight or new highlight. I'll just use new highlight here. Select an element, one element. So this query selector will only select the first element that is matching this class criteria, this selection criteria. So the elements can have two elements or more elements can have the same class name, and it can have multiple classes also. Right. So this has two classes. This element has two classes. This element has same one class, which is highlight. If I select document select by highlight, it will select the first element that is matching this criteria, which has a class of highlight. So instead, if I try query selector all, it will select all the items that are matching this criteria. So let's say I have this list item with an ID as item 1. I can actually select the items by ID. So if I want to select by ID, I should use pound symbol or hash symbol before and the ID of it. Item 1. This selects this particular item. If I have something else, let's say item 2, which does not exist, it gives a none. There is no element that is matching this criteria. And once I have selected an element, let's say I'll select the first element that has this criteria, I can actually get all the attributes of this node. Let's save this thing in a variable. So element dot attributes. So all the attributes, it will do this. Even class is an attribute. And if I have something like, let's say, title attribute. These are all HTML attributes. We will discuss this when we are discussing about the HTML. My title, okay. So if I select by this element and print element dot attributes, It gives us all the attributes. It even gave us the title attribute. Similarly, we can actually change the class of this. Let's say add the class element dot class list. If you do, it'll give the class list. So same thing. If I do want to add a new class to it, my new class, it adds that class to it. If I now print element class list, new, my new class also got added. Similarly, I can do remove, replace, add, remove, toggle. Toggle we already discussed. If the element class exists, it will remove. If not, it will add. And replace will replace element dot class list dot replace will take the first item as the old class which need to be replaced and the new class which needs to be put in. So that's about adding or removing classes. So we can similarly we can actually add the attributes also. So we have this title attribute for this element. Let's say attributes element attributes. I can actually add or set or remove attributes. Let's just get some attribute. Let's say I want to get a value of the attribute title. Get attribute title the name of the attribute. Let's say title. It will give the value of that attribute. So similarly, I can actually set the attribute, which attribute I want to set, and some other title, the new value that I want to set. So now if I just try to get the attribute title, the new title got set. So similarly, I can actually, if the title, if the attribute does not exist, this call will actually add the attribute to it. Let's say I want to add something like source. The source attribute is not allowed in list items, but it allows in JavaScript. It's not legally correct according to HTML standards, but if we can add any type of attribute, let's say data attribute, I will add data source. Data hyphen source is these type of attributes are called data attributes, which we can use any type of data attribute we can use. So it's perfectly valid in HTML. Some data source. So this attribute does not exist on this element, but it will add this when I call this. So now if I print element that attributes, it gives all the attributes. Even data source attribute got added. If you inspect this element, you can see the data source attribute got added in the HTML. So this way we can add the attributes. And similar to this, we can actually check if the element exists has a specific attribute or not. Similarly, let's say element dot has attribute of ID. It doesn't have an attribute ID. So this item does not have a ID in it. So I can actually add the attribute also. Set attribute, which is nothing but adding if it does not exist. My list item. So if you inspect this element, the ID has got added. And similarly, we can actually remove the attributes also. Element dot remove attribute. Let's say I will remove the title attribute or data and source attribute. This accepts only one parameter. So remove attribute. If you inspect now element dot attributes, doesn't have the data attribute. Same thing reflects in the HTML. Okay, this is how we add attributes and remove attributes. And similarly, we can have styling also, element dot. So this element we actually got from document dot query selector of I. I'm selecting again element dot styles. If you see element dot style, it will print inline styles that were added to this particular element. You see the inline styles. There are no inline styles. We can add the inline styles here. Let's add that element dot style dot color. Let's say I will use blue. So the color got changed to blue. So if you inspect this element and see this style got added when we manipulated it with the JavaScript. So color blue. So even the same thing, color, if we just access this, it will give you the value of the style element. Similarly, we can set background color equals purple or red. You see here, it is background color has been set to red. So the CSS attribute is background hyphen color, but in JavaScript, it will translate into camel case like this, background capital C color. So this is a subtle difference between CSS and JavaScript. So that's about setting and getting attributes and classes, even styles within. So next thing we will look into is the variables and data types. So first thing that before the introduction of let as a variable, so we had only one data type. Let's just move this away into a old file. We'll just move this all back to here. We start from scratch. Let's create a new HTML file, index.html. Create some sample. We have something like style.script versions, which will include in here. There is a script here, script source /r script urgings. It is within the same folder. We can use / or even without using / it can refer to the current folder. The script is in the same folder as HTML file. It will take from there. If it is in a new folder, let's say JS, I'll move the script to JS folder. If this is the hierarchy, index.html, we have to use /JS/script. We'll use defer so that it will load at the end. The style, so if it's in a folder, we should use the folder hierarchy like this. We can actually eliminate this dot slash also. This also works. Let's try printing a small info. Let's reload. It's printing. So this script is getting loaded. As soon as we save, it will be reloaded. Okay, now let's do something like define variables here. So in order to use any value or usability of variables, we have to define them in a container called a variable name, my variable. Let's say this is a name. I can give a value to it, say 1, 2, 3. I can just use this value, this variable anywhere. Console log my variable is this. So before introduction of other data declaration elements, only var was allowed in JavaScript. Var is a global scope variable, which means so within a function or within a smaller block of code, if we use var, it has global scope. If we change something within a function, let's just define a function. Functions are defined like this. My function. Let's say my variable equals, and I will call this function from here. To call a function, we have to invoke it like this. This actually changed my variable into type string. It's a string. Now, this is allowed when we are using variables. Let's say I have another type called let. Let is another way of declaring a variable. Let is a scoped variable, which means my let variable equals string, or I'll just make it as 456. I'll define another function, my second function. Inside this, I will use my let variable as another. I'll call this function to a log of my let variable. So if you see here, my let variable is still 456. Even though I called this function, it did not change this value because it is a scoped variable. Inside this, if I do the same statement inside a function, side function, like this is another let. So this is local to this function. Even if I manipulate my let variable, same name here, it won't affect the global scope variable. So this is the difference between variable var and let. So let is a scope variable which overrides within a block scope. If I have had the same value here, var, I'll just print the var. Inside this, it would have inside this the value got changed to high, And if I go here, my variable got changed to 1, 2, 3. So the meaning of this var is if I don't declare this inside this, it will assume that it is the global scope. So usually var was the only way we used to have variables in JavaScript in the previous versions. So let has been introduced so that it will allow us to have local scope overrides. So var, so most of the times whenever we're using variables, you should always use let unless you have a specific reason to use var. Var is a global scope variable, which is confusing if we change it in multiple places. So let will have a secure way of scoping that, and within the block where you declared it, only there it will get changed. So that's about let and var. This is how we define variables in JavaScript. Let's see the data types of these variables. So let's say I can also have variables, multiple variables declared at once. Where x equals 4, y equals 5, z equals 6. All this is still allowed. If I just print x, if I access y, z, it's all set all at once. There is an empty value. If I don't assign any value to it, it will be by default undefined. If I try to access that variable, it is undefined. So if I try console log of empty, it will give the undefined value. There is something called null. So where w equals null, if I just try to access w, it is null. Null means nothing, there is nothing in it. Undefined means it's not even defined. No value is assigned to this particular variable, is what it means. And we have looked into the scope of this. Let's demonstrate the scope a little bit further. Let's say I will add two new boxes to the HTML content there. So name, I'll add title, something like here I'll add one more division, box 1, box 2. This I will give class as website. So I will define some styles here. I will use body, I will put something like margin 0. Display, I'll use flex. Flex is a layout mechanism. This and all I'll explain. It's finished JavaScript and getting to style sheets. Justify content center. It's actually indenting the content into the middle. Alignment is center. So I have font size as 2.6 and style. Here we define class as boxes. This content I want to make it display in a grid. So I'll just put boxes. See line here, we can manipulate CSS styling here. It template columns. I want to put it in two columns. One canvas student. Next with the system. I'll use title for this. Represent our own segments. This and put it outside. So these divisions, I want to put boxes around this. Let's do that. So boxes, inside boxes division, each division will have box size. With as person adding string font size given the color will be gone. I add the background, it will be agent. Background color I'll use again. Now we have two boxes. Yes. So now these two boxes we will manipulate CSS of these with JavaScript. Let's go here. We select this particular box, right side one, which has the class name right, and then change the color of it to something like purple. Okay. So now I'll select document, query selected, which has dot right class, and then I will use style dot background color to purple. Okay. So not this style, should use style instead. Now it changed. So the thing is, this time we are going to use, let's reduce this. So instead of purple, I'm going to use it in a variable. Let's say I'll use color as purple here. And this variable I'm going to use. Just reduce the font size. That is clear. So this is good. Now, if I have to have another function, let's say function called heading color. Now I'll change the heading color from this using this document query selector, which has title in it, style dot color as color. Let's copy it. It's the class's title. Did not change. Let's print this one. Document dot query selector title. It's one. Then color style of color. Oh, style. Okay. So color is not different. That's the reason. Okay, we are not calling this function here. We declared it. We haven't called. So now we called it and just got changed it to purple. Let's say I want this to be blue inside this. I'm going to change color as blue. And I changed this. But outside also it got changed. If I change here inside, it's affecting the other one also because we use the same name. We can instead use a different name here, even when we have the same name. The advantage of using let is same. So instead of color as blue here, I'm going to define a new variable let stuff. Yes, let color new colors. You want to comment out this part. Use let new colors. Values new colors. So if I use new color with let as a declaration, now it's not changing. This is how we use let and var. Let's find out and see if any other things we can do with variables. Let's say I want to use x. X is value 4. Let's try to find out what's the data type of this. So for finding out the data type, in Python we will use type. In JavaScript we will use type of. So type of x is number. Let's just try initializing these values with some numbers. Let string demo. Let's my string. I do console log. Type of string demo. We'll use type of operator here. It's string demo, which will give us string. Type of string is string. Similarly, we'll use integer demo. We'll use the type of operator. So it is a number. Let's try a float number, float value, let's say 4.6. I will use same thing, float demo. What's the value type? It is still a number. So either both floating points and integers have the same data type, which is number. So apart from this, we have null type and undefined types also. Let's find that undefined. We can explicitly define it as undefined, or we can just leave it like this without any declaration. We can just use it like this. Without initialization, if you keep the variable, it is by default goes to undefined data type. And there is null data type, which is explicitly initialized to null. We print that. Null is also an object. So if we compare it with if null, you know, print true, else, okay, sorry, I should print it as console log. False. So by default, null will evaluate to false. Even similar to that, we can use undefined also. By default, undefined also will evaluate to false. So undefined. By default, null and undefined will evaluate to false. Wherever in our logic, if we use value like this, it will be always false. And we have another data type called arrays, which we can define with constants. So we have seen let and where. We also have to see a special declaration called const. Const will help us to identify or declare a variable that is constant. It's not a variable, it's a constant. My constant. Let's say I define this value to 5. And if I try to change the value at a later point in my code to something else, 6, this will fail. Our JavaScript will throw an error, uncaught type error, assigning to constant. So once a value is assigned to a constant, it cannot be changed. Suppose I have an object, my const object. I will assign it to an object which has a s b. Now, right, I try to change my const object to something else. Let's say CSD. This is not allowed to throw an error, but we can actually change the values. This is not allowed. So instead, I can actually change text properties. dot A equals C. Console next object. This is allowed. So the properties of an object can be changed. The object reference itself cannot be changed. We cannot reassign or replace the constant entity with a new value, but we can actually change the properties of that. Let's say, suppose I have another data type called arrays, my array. So this I'm going to declare it as a constant. We can use let and var also here, but not strictly necessary. Constant, we can still use constants to store arrays. Let's say I will have something like tango. No, I will this is fine. Now, if I want to change this to a new array, this is not allowed. But I can actually append to this array. So let's say I want to push an element. Append is nothing but push in JavaScript, something like guess I already have one. I'll just use cat. I'll print it again. Now it's allowed. So basically, arrays can be manipulated, but it cannot be replaced. If we used in constants, any object or variable can be appended with. If we are using complex data types like arrays and objects, we can append or manipulate its properties. But if we are using plain data, like integers, float, basic data types, we cannot replace the constants with a new value. So that's the difference. So if we say the type of my array, it's console log type of my array is also an object. This is arrays. And then there is booleans we can use of. Say let A is true, let B is false. A boolean. Now if I try to compare two elements, let's say my one is 5, my variable 2 is 4. If I try to print my var 1 equals var 2, this is false. Let's say if I change this to 5, let's say change this to a string, this again gives us true, but it's actually not true. It's a value integer and it's a string file. But what this equal to checks is it's the loose equivalence operator, which will see if both the values are same in the literal context. So it looks alike if both values look alike. If I want to compare strictly whether data types match and the values also match, I have to use three equal results. This is a strict equivalence operator, which will check the data type of the values as well as the data residing in that also. And comparing these two, we'll use this. There is double equals and there is three equals. Three equals is always we should use. If we use double equals, it will loosely evaluate the values comparison, compares it loosely. And if they look alike, it will make sure that it is true. Let's say I have strings 5, EP as 5. Let's try comparing these. This is still false because they don't look alike. So what's next? It's some kind of mathematics we can do with the values. So we have seen arithmetic operations. Say A as 5, B as 4, by 2 plus B. Fine. This is 9. This is correct. Now let's try doing one thing with string and one thing with. Let's initialize B to 4. Let's do the same thing again. A plus B. It gives 5 and 4. 5 for 54, which is not correct. So let's try getting the type of this. It's a number. I think we should do this type of A and B plus 20. So it actually converted from B is 4 as it is string. A also it got converted into string and appended these two. So only the plus operator will convert strings. So if I use A minus B here now, and so log A minus B, that's fine. B as 4. This actually converted that into integers. Fine, do that. Type. So number. It got converted to number. Similarly, if I do A divided by B, let's see. So P also got converted into a number and it gave us the results. Similarly, I can have modulo, which will give us the remainder of these two. Then if we on exponent operations. We can do star star, which is nothing but a to the power of b. So 5 power of 4, it gave the answer. So these are arithmetic operations that we can do on the variables. And let's try something with arrays. This time I'm going to declare a new array. I will make it as a constant. I will have a collection which has data on. Let's say I will have one more variable called item. That item as national. So this semicolon is not strictly necessary, but it's a good practice to put semicolon at the end of each line of statements. So this item I'm adding. So like in C and other languages, it's not strictly necessary to follow the same data type in an array. An array can have any kind of data type elements that belong to any data type. So I can have objects, strings, integers, any kind of booleans also. So this particular array has 4 items. One is a string, one is another string, one is a number, and one is boolean. So I want to know the length of this array, I can do it with collection.length. So it's a little collection.length will give us the total number of items in the array, which is 4 in this case. So I can access a specific item. The index starts with 0. The 0th item is this, first item is this, second item is this, third item is this. If I want to access a specific index, I can access it with 1. This will give the first element, which is the element at the index 1, collection of 1 fitting. It will give the flashlight, which is at the index 1, this item 0, 1, 2, and 3. So similarly, if I want to add a new item to the end of the array, I can actually do it in 2 ways. So if we just print this collection, let's say console log collection. If we expand this, it has few properties. Length is 4. Now, if I want to add a new item to the end of this array, I can actually make use of this length property and add an item like this. Collection of collection dot length item. So now if I print the same collection again, it has 5 items. The new item got added at the end. So what if I will just use collection of 9th item, index 9 equals index 9 item. Let's print it again. See what happens. So it has now total length of 10, and there are only 6 items here. But the length is 10. So the JavaScript has expanded the array length to 10 as we have used 9th element, index 9. So it has increased the length to 10. If I try to access a element at the index 8, let's say collection at 8, which I haven't added. I've added only 9 index. Let's see what it will have. So collection index 8 is undefined. So by default, all the gaps are initialized to 8, index 5, index 6, index 7, index 8. All those items will be initialized to undefined, and the index 9 is initialized to this new value that I added. So this is how arrays work in JavaScript. So there is another way to add to the end of the array. There are functions or methods that are there in the array objects, which we will explore now. So let's define a new array, backpack contents. I'll just use pt headline, then this time I'm going to use array methods instead of index lengths. Backpack contents will print now. So it has 3 items. Now I'm going to make use of array functions, array methods. So before that, I'll just use push. To push a new element, I will add a pencil to it. And now print it again. So this has pencil also got added at the end. And there is something called shift and unshift, which will allow us to pop some element from the front or from the back. Let's say I'll use unshift, which will add a new item at the beginning. This actually added the item at the end. Pencil push has added at the end. Now I'm going to add it at the beginning with unshift. New item I'm going to add unshift. I will use pencil, and let's say I will use 5. For these 2 elements, it's going to add to the beginning. Let's print it now. Now it has 6 elements in total. Pencil at the front, 5 at the front, the remaining elements. Similarly, I can actually pop some element from the back of the array with pop function. Let's just use backpack contents dot pop. Pop by default removes an element from the end. I just print backpack again. So this pop will remove from the end. So earlier before the pop, we had pencil. Now we did pop. It removed the element from the end. It gave us this pencil got removed. What remains is 3 elements. Pop and shift. And shift we haven't used. Let's use shift. Shift actually shifts by 1, removing the first element. Let's go here. So we have at the end, we have these 5 elements here, pencil, 5, 18, and lamp, 10. Let's do a shift operation on the backpack contents. Shift, which will remove the first element. Let's print it again. And so it got removed. First element got removed from pencil, got moved into the array of 4 items. So these are the operations we can do on arrays. So what if I want to iterate through these arrays? There is loops in Python where we have used for loops and range of indexes in the array. So we can still use the same kind of logic in JavaScript also. For iterating through all the elements of an array, we can make use of for each loop, which will allow us to have items in the function. This is a callback function. This gets called for each of the items. For each of the items, this for each function accepts a function itself. That function is going to have one argument, and I will just use. So for each item, it will print this list of items, the list of all items. For each loop, we'll be calling this function. What we are doing here is passing a function to it. So for each accepts a function parameter. So let's define a function. Let's say let my function equals, it's nothing but declaring a function that accepts item, any argument, one argument it will accept. This does console log of item. So this function we're actually passing on to for each loop. That will do the same thing. My function two values, name was already used. So this for each all has called for each of the items in the backpack array. It called this function with that particular item as an argument. So in a shorthand, I have used this entire thing in this place, in this. And this is a shorthand way of writing inline functions. So I will use it how to define functions three other ways. But for now, we'll stick with this. So there is another way to traverse these items. We can actually use backpack in use of for loop for let item of backpack contents console log of item. This is another way of accessing the array elements. But array itself will give us this functionality for each functionality, which iterates through the entire list of all the items. So for now, we will stick with this. We'll visit these for loops in a later session. So we'll make use of this for now. And there is another thing called join, another method called join, which will allow us to join elements of an array with a specific string, substring. So let's use join. Just use console log join. By default, this joins with comma. So I can actually specify what is the character that I want to join with, comma and space. It gives spaces in between. If I want to join these elements with hyphen in between, with spaces, two spaces front and back, I can use that. Yes. These are the methods that are there in arrays. And there is a method called splice, which will remove items from a specific location. Let's say I want to remove an item headline. So we have to find out the index of the headline. Basically, we can find out that with uh, index of, let's say index of operate Index of method we will use on backpack items, or index of, let's say, headlamp. This will give the index of this particular item. So index is 2. So if you see here, 0, 1, and 2. So 2 is the index of headlamp. So I want to remove the headlamp and also pen. Let's say from here I want to remove 2 elements. For that I have another method called splice. Splice actually accepts the starting index of the item that I want to remove and the length of the items that I want to remove. Let's say I will use this index of headlamp, which is actually 2. Let's store this in index of headlamp. We use let. Here I'm going to start removing this headlamp and also the pen also. So starting index is 2, which is the index of headlamp. And I want to remove 2 items starting from here, 1 and 2. So I'll use 2. If I use 1, it will only remove that headlamp item. Let's see that. So if I print now, it had removed headlamp. And if I use 2 items in a row, this is the length of items to be removed. It has removed headlamp and pen. Instead of headlamp, if I use PG here, index of PG, I use starting from PG, it has removed 2 items, 1 and 2. And now what remains is 5 and 10. So this is another method in JavaScript arrays, which we will be mostly using in our day-to-day work. So there is another method called map. So let's use that. Let's try backpack contents. Let's not remove these items for now. We will just comment out this. Map accepts another function inside. So function which accepts an item. This actually has to return another item. Say I will do something like align plus item plus align. This is very useful when we are appending list items to an array to HTML content. So this actually gives another array, new array. Let new array. Arrays are nothing but lists. Let's print console log. Okay. So new array has for each of the items file, wiki, headlamp, and we have this. For each of the items, if I want to add new content or manipulate the existing content and return a new array, I will make use of map, which will traverse through each of the items of the array, and whatever return value we give, that will be passed to the end array. So there is a shorthand for declaring the functions. Let's try to use functions in 3 ways. For this map function, I'm going to use it in 3 ways. One way to declare a function is my function. Okay, this is just an example. This accepts an argument called item. This gives a return the same thing. Return this. If this is one way to declare function. Instead of this, I'm going to pass into my function 3 as an argument command, which will do the same kind of thing. So next time, I'm going to use function in another way. I will declare the function in a new syntax called arrow syntax, which actually is like this. Or anonymous. Before covering this, let's go look at anonymous functions. I'm going to define a constant which has my function for equal to function. This function does not have a name. So if you see the difference here, this function has a name called my function 3, and this function does not have a name. This variable or constant has a name, my function 4. So this is an anonymous function. This function I'm assigning to this constant. The same thing I'm going to use. And instead of my function 3, I'm going to use my function 4 here. It results in the same set of data. So these two are equivalent. In another way, there is another way to define a function called arrow functions. The syntax is like this. Item equals greater than, this is called the arrow, and return this. This is called the arrow function, which we cannot save it directly. Const my function 5, I'm going to use this. What this does is, this will declare a function and assign that function to this constant. If I use the same function, same thing. So there are three ways to define functions. One is like this, second, and third way is like this. This is the most famous. And instead of defining it here, I can actually write it in line like this. This does the same thing. Same thing. It does the same thing. And there is a shorthand. If we have only one statement in the function, only one return statement in the function, I can actually define it like this. Function 6. Instead of curly brackets, I can have opening and closing brackets like this. Return I don't have to use. So I'm using like this, I can just use it like this. If there is only one return statement in the function, in the arrow function, I can use it like this. First is the parameter, after the arrow, the return value. This works the same way. Same thing. I can even go even further. I can eliminate this. Brackets also I can remove. This also I can remove. Just one simple arrow. This is the input parameters, and this is the return value, that function. This inline defines a function. Which does the same. I can just replace the entire string with just this syntax. does the same thing again over and over. So this is about functions, how we define functions. That's about for today. Let's see objects and iterating objects tomorrow. There is something called for item in object. This is what we'll use for iterating through items in an object. This we will see tomorrow.